The sneer came first, then the words that cut through the quiet hum of the airport lounge like a knife through silk. And Dr. Elena Reyes looked up from her medical journal to see a man in a $3,000 suit staring at her with the kind of contempt usually reserved for something unpleasant discovered on the bottom of an expensive shoe. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with false politeness that barely masked his disdain, "but I think you might be in the wrong lounge. The regular gates are back that way." And he gestured dismissively toward the main terminal as if directing lost livestock back to their pen. Elena sat there in her scrubs, still wearing her hospital badge because she'd come straight from a 14-hour surgery that had saved a 6-year-old's life, and she felt the familiar weight of judgment settle over her shoulders like a heavy cloak she'd worn too many times before. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun. Her brown skin showed the exhaustion of too many consecutive shifts, and her sneakers were the comfortable kind that surgeons wore when they knew they'd be standing for hours, and she understood immediately what this man saw when he looked at her. Not a cardiac surgeon with 2 medical degrees and a wall full of awards, but a brown woman in work clothes who clearly didn't belong in the exclusive first-class lounge where champagne flowed and leather chairs cost more than some people's monthly rent. The man's companion, a woman draped in designer labels with perfectly manicured nails tapping against her phone screen, looked up long enough to add her own contribution to the humiliation. "Honestly, security is so lax these days, anyone can just wander in here. I'm going to complain to management about this." Elena could have stood up, could have walked away and avoided the confrontation, could have done what she'd done countless times before when faced with these assumptions about who she was and where she belonged. But something in her chest had hardened over the past 14 hours, over the past year of pandemic surgeries, over the lifetime of being brilliant and accomplished and still being treated like she was trying to steal space that didn't belong to her. "I'm in the right lounge," she said quietly, her voice carrying the steady calm that came from years of delivering difficult news to families in crisis. The tone that doctors learn when they need people to hear truth, even when it's uncomfortable. "I have a first-class ticket. I'm a member of this airline's top-tier status program, and I've earned my place here just like everyone else." The man laughed, an ugly sound that made several other passengers look over with interest, and Elena watched him pull out his phone with theatrical flourish. "We'll see about that. I know the regional director of this airline personally. Went to Harvard together. One call and we'll get this sorted out. I'm sure they'll want to know their security is letting random people access premium facilities." Harvard, Elena thought. Of course he went to Harvard, because men like this always went to schools with names that carried weight, always had connections they could leverage, always believed that their networks and their backgrounds gave them the right to police who belonged in exclusive spaces. What he didn't know, couldn't know from his position of casual cruelty, was that Elena had also gone to Harvard, had graduated top of her medical school class, had been recruited by hospitals across the country before choosing to stay in her hometown where she could serve the community that had raised her. The community that included immigrants and working-class families, and people who looked like her parents had looked when they'd arrived from Columbia with nothing but dreams and determination. "Go ahead and make your call," Elena said, and there was something in her voice now that made the man pause, a confidence that didn't match his mental image of someone he could intimidate into leaving. "But before you do, you might want to check the name on my boarding pass against your regional director's schedule, because I suspect you're about to have a very uncomfortable conversation." His eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing some of his certainty, and Elena watched him debate whether to follow through with his threat or let it drop. watched him calculate whether this brown woman in scrubs could possibly have the kind of connections or status that would make him look foolish. His pride won, as Elena had known it would, because men like this couldn't back down once they'd committed to their position, couldn't admit the possibility that they'd made assumptions based on prejudice rather than facts. So he dialed his phone and waited with that self-satisfied expression people wear when they're certain they're about to be proven right. The voice that answered was crisp and professional, carrying through the phone speaker loud enough that several nearby passengers could hear, and the man said with exaggerated patience, "Richard, it's Bradley Thornton. Sorry to bother you, but I'm in the first-class lounge at gate 32, and there's a situation with someone who doesn't appear to have proper access. I thought you'd want to know about the security breach." The pause that followed was long enough that Bradley's confident expression began to flicker, and then Richard's voice came back, careful and measured in a way that suggested he was choosing his words very deliberately. "Bradley, can you describe this person you're concerned about?" Bradley looked Elena up and down with obvious disdain, as if cataloging her unworthiness. Hispanic woman, mid-30s, wearing medical scrubs and sneakers. Claims she has first-class access, but clearly doesn't fit the profile of our typical premium passengers. Another pause, longer this time, and Elena could almost hear Richard's internal calculations happening across the phone line, could imagine him closing his eyes and preparing to navigate a situation that was about to become very complicated. "Bradley, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The woman you're describing is Dr. Elena Reyes. She's one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the country. She pioneered a new surgical technique that saved hundreds of lives. She's been featured in medical journals and news programs, and more relevantly to your current situation, she's the guest speaker at tomorrow's medical conference that our airline is sponsoring, which means she's flying on a complimentary first-class ticket that I personally arranged as part of our corporate partnership with the conference organizers." The words fell into the lounge like stones dropped into still water, ripples of shock spreading outward as other passengers who'd been pretending not to listen suddenly found reasons to look up from their devices and magazines, and Elena watched Bradley's face cycle through expressions too quickly to catalog: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally a sickly pale realization that he'd miscalculated catastrophically. Richard wasn't finished, and his voice had taken on an edge that suggested he was no longer concerned with preserving Bradley's dignity. "Furthermore, Dr. Reyes is exactly the kind of passenger we want to cultivate relationships with. She represents the medical community we're trying to serve. She embodies the diversity and excellence we claim to value in our corporate messaging. And you've just harassed her based on assumptions about what our premium passengers should look like. So I'm going to need you to apologize immediately. And then I'm going to need you to send me a full written account of this incident so I can determine whether your behavior warrants further action." Bradley's hands shook slightly as he ended the call, and Elena watched him struggle with what came next, watched pride battle with self-preservation, watched the mental gymnastics people perform when they're forced to confront the ugliness of their own biases. His companion had gone very quiet, her phone now forgotten in her lap, her earlier confidence evaporated like morning mist. "Dr. Reyes," Bradley began, and his voice had lost all his earlier arrogance, replaced with something that sounded almost like fear. "I apologize. I made assumptions that were completely inappropriate. I should never have questioned your presence here." Elena let him sit with the apology for a long moment, let him feel the weight of what he'd done and what it revealed about him, before she spoke in that same calm, steady voice. "Mr. Thornton, your apology addresses the immediate incident, but not the underlying problem. You didn't question my presence because of any actual security concern. You questioned it because I didn't match your mental image of who belongs in exclusive spaces.
I'm wearing scrubs because I came straight from surgery, where I spent 14 hours repairing a child's heart defect. I look tired because I am tired from doing work that saves lives. And my skin is brown because my parents immigrated from Colombia and worked minimum wage jobs so their children could have opportunities they never had. None of those things make me less deserving of first-class access, but all of those things triggered your assumption that I must be in the wrong place. The real question isn't whether you apologize to me. It's whether you're willing to examine why you made those assumptions in the first place and what you're going to do differently the next time you encounter someone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of success or belonging. The lounge had gone completely silent, every passenger now openly watching this confrontation unfold, and Elena saw several people nodding in agreement, saw a few recording on their phones, saw the social consequences of Bradley's behavior playing out in real time, as his reputation took damage that no amount of Harvard connections could fully repair. A young woman across the lounge approached hesitantly, her voice soft but determined. "Dr. Reyes, I just wanted to say thank you for saying what you said. My mother is a housekeeper, and I'm the first in my family to go to college, and I can't tell you how many times I've been made to feel like I don't belong in spaces I've earned my way into." Elena smiled at her, genuine warmth breaking through the exhaustion and anger. "What's your name?" "Maria. I'm studying engineering." "Maria, you belong everywhere your talent and hard work take you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and more importantly, when you succeed, when you become the engineer you're working to be, remember this moment and make sure you create space for the people coming up behind you." As boarding was called and passengers began gathering their belongings, Elena noticed Bradley sitting very still in his chair, his earlier companion having moved to a different seat, his phone dark in his hand. And she felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and sadness, because this moment of accountability was necessary, but shouldn't have been necessary. This lesson in humility was deserved, but revealed how far society still had to go. She thought about the 6-year-old's chest she had opened that morning, a brown-skinned girl named Isabella, whose parents spoke Spanish at home and cleaned offices at night. And she thought about how Isabella would grow up in a world that would judge her the same way Bradley had judged Elena, would assume limitations based on skin color and accent and socioeconomic background. But she also thought that Isabella now had a repaired heart and a chance at a full life because Elena had refused to accept the limitations other people tried to impose, had pushed through medical school and residency and countless moments of being underestimated, had become excellent not just for herself, but for all the Isabellas who needed surgeons who understood their communities and their struggles. As the plane lifted into the sky and Elena finally opened her laptop to work on the speech she'd deliver at tomorrow's conference, she decided to add a new section about bias in healthcare, about how patients of color often received substandard care because doctors and nurses made assumptions about their pain tolerance or their likelihood of following medical advice, about how representation mattered not just for symbolic reasons, but because it literally saved lives when patients could see themselves reflected in their healthcare providers.
What you just witnessed isn't just about one arrogant man getting called out for his prejudice. It's about a pattern of discrimination that plays out thousands of times every day in airports and hospitals, in corporate offices and academic institutions, in every space where excellence is supposed to be rewarded, but assumptions about who looks successful still override evidence of actual achievement. Bradley Thornton saw a brown woman in scrubs and immediately decided she was in the wrong place, despite the fact that she was sitting in a lounge that requires verification of premium status to access, despite the fact that his assumption required him to believe security had completely failed, despite the fact that the simplest explanation was that she belonged there. But his brain didn't default to the simplest explanation because his biases told him a different story,
one where people who look like Elena are workers, not professionals, are service providers, not decision makers, are perpetually in the wrong place no matter what they've achieved or earned. And here's what makes this particularly damaging. Elena has saved hundreds of lives, has contributed groundbreaking research to her field, has every credential and accomplishment that society claims to value, and yet none of that protected her from the casual cruelty of someone who decided in 3 seconds that she didn't belong. If someone with her level of achievement still faces this treatment, imagine what it's like for people earlier in their careers, for students still trying to prove themselves, for workers in fields that don't come with prestigious titles and clear markers of success.
The power of this story isn't just in Bradley's humiliation, though that moment of accountability was deeply satisfying. It's in Elena's response, the way she used the confrontation to name the larger pattern, to educate rather than just defend, to turn a moment of personal attack into a teaching opportunity about systemic bias. That's emotional labor she shouldn't have had to perform. That's work on top of the already exhausting work of being a surgeon and being excellent in a field where people constantly doubt you. But she did it anyway, because she understood that silence allows these patterns to continue unchallenged. If this story moved you, if you felt that anger when Bradley made his assumptions and that satisfaction when the truth came out, then I need you to do something with those feelings. Share this video because it illustrates a truth that too many people want to ignore, that racism and bias aren't always loud and obvious. They're often quiet and polite and wrapped in concern about rules and standards. Comment below with times you've witnessed or experienced this kind of casual discrimination, because building a record of these stories, creating a community that refuses to normalize these interactions, that's how we create cultural pressure for change. Subscribe if you believe these conversations matter, if you think storytelling can shift perspectives and challenge assumptions, if you want to be part of a community committed to examining bias rather than defending it. And most importantly, the next time you find yourself making assumptions about someone based on how they look or dress or speak, pause and ask yourself what evidence you actually have, what story your bias is telling you, and whether you're about to become Bradley Thornton in someone else's story. Change happens when enough people decide that their comfort with existing patterns matters less than other people's right to dignity and respect.